Yes, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the panel on the other side, aligning industry, investment, and workforce across borders. I am Mayra Maldonado. I'm the Executive Director of the Hunt Institute for Global Competitiveness at the University of Texas El Paso, and I'm going to briefly provide some context prior to the discussion that we're going to have with our experts. So we have Dr. Daniel Covarrubias, the Director of the Texas Center for Border Economic and Enterprise Development at the Texas A&M International University. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. Then we have Ambassador Jerónimo Gutiérrez Fernández, who is a Senior Advisor at Covington and Burling, LLP, former Ambassador of Mexico to the United States. Thank you for being here. And then we have Jorge Márquez, who is a Chief Marketing Officer at Grupo México Transportes. Thank you for being here. And then we have Alfonso Poncho Nevares, who is a Vice Chairman at Port Eagle Pass, Piedras Negras, former member of the Texas House of Representatives. Thank you for being here. And then we have Jerry Schwebel, the Executive Vice President in the Corporate International Division at the International Bank of Commerce, IBC Bank, in Laredo, Texas. And I'm going to start with my presentation. I want to say that, yes, Mexico is a top trading partner for the United States, but when we analyze total trade by state, by number of states, is Canada the top trading partner. Only the southern states have Mexico as top trading partner, and except California, who has China as top trading partner. Next, please. An important aspect is that $1.3 billion, or 25% of the trade, goes through ports of entry. I also want to highlight here at the bottom that of all of the trade that goes through North America, 64.4% goes by truck and 13% by rail. Next one, please. And these are the top ports of entry with respect to trade. Laredo is number one. Daniel and Jerry are based in Laredo. And we have also the US-Canada ports of entry. El Paso ranks number 4th. And the US-Canada land ports of entry suffered a decrease from 2023 to 2024, while the US-Mexico border ports of entry had an increase. So I'm going to start the conversation with you, Daniel. One question that I have is, as we approach the USMCA revision next year, what are the competitive advantages that the US, Canada, and Mexico have? And how can we leverage that to strengthen our global position?
Thank you. Well, I guess it goes without saying, again, a million times, thanks to Enrique Perret for putting this together. An amazing forum once again. Congratulations to the US-Mexico Foundation. Okay, yes, so we're officially in the review process, right? I mean, the calls for proposals started and everything's going towards next year. So all three countries have assets that can serve as complementarities between them, right? I keep writing about it and saying that Mexico has a manufacturing base that's very solid and has been around for years now. So that's Mexico. That's what Mexico brings to the table. That manufacturing base that's really established, that is a pillar of these supply chains that are integrated toward North America. And Mexico has another very important asset, which is the age of its population. None of the other two countries have the demographic age that Mexico has. So that's a big asset also. On the US side, it's innovation, technology, AI, smart manufacturing, anything having to do with talent development. All three countries have talent development, but obviously the US is a world leader in innovation and technological development and these exponential technologies. And Canada has the natural resources that none of the other two countries have. So that's a big win in having those three complementarities between these three countries. And that's what makes North America North America. I mean, the key is getting into the USMCA, how we bring those complementarities to the table and how we leverage them to produce a more solid North American economic bloc. Not three potent countries, but a North American economic bloc as a whole. And we're going to get into some proposals talking about that. But those are the three keys of them.
Thank you, Daniel. And taking advantage that you have worked for the government, Poncho, I would like to ask, what lessons from public policy best guide strategies to maximize USMCA benefits for regional industries and cross-border trade?
Again, thank you for inviting Port EPN. I think the biggest thing, and I work off consistency and congruency, and that's a certain amount of certainty that's required. We all know that that's not always possible, but the function of government in this is to make sure that the agreement itself, and remember, it's just basically NAFTA with very few exceptions, that it's leveraged to the hilt, and that means bringing expertise to the local level. And I think government, both at the local level, at the state level, and certainly at the federal level, needs to make sure that, as we were looking at this slide that has the different ports and how they're more successful than others, I would bet that in each and every one of these places, you have a certain level of expertise over the trade agreements themselves. And I'll give you a good example. Is being able to maximize and understand the differences. For example, one of the automotive issues with regard to country of origin. 75%, I think, and I might be wrong on the percentage, but I think I'm very close in terms of what's the country of origin that's acceptable in terms of where it's manufactured. Well, that's an important piece of information to know, not just from the port director side, but how much expertise are you bringing in? And I think the government should play more of a substantial role in being able to identify and place people and allow these other governmental entities to have this type of personnel, because I think we're missing many opportunities at these different ports to actually maximize what the agreements can actually do.
Thank you so much. And speaking about the USMCA, we have been working on globalization, right? North America has been working on globalization through decades. Now there's a shift towards regionalization. So Ambassador Jerónimo, is this the right path? And are we prepared for this shift? What do you think about this?
Thanks, Mayra. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you for listening to what we have to say, and to my fellow panelists, it's a pleasure. Very quickly, I think that the NAFTA region, or now the USMCA region, if you want to call it that way, has not been only about how much we trade among ourselves, which is a lot, obviously, or how much we invest with in each other, which is also a lot. But it's always been about how do we produce together. So in that sense, the regional, the regional notion has always been there since the early 90s, right? I think what has changed is two or three things now. One is that when we talk about, supply chains, global supply chains, I think we're talking about regional supply chains. And the most fundamental change, I think, is that now, it's not going to be as easy as we have had it over the last 3 or 4 decades to be trade partners, regional trade partners, and not be more politically aligned on, security issues, for example, or geopolitics. And I think that's what's really pushing this change towards, there's two forces. One is really the geopolitics and the security component of that is pushing towards regionalization. And I think we were overly optimistic in the 90s, thinking that it was going to be possible just to, every single country trading with every single country. That was just, too much. And the other point that I would make, I think it's relevant, is, so again, it's a link between trade and security that is forcing de-risking of countries and companies and moving it more, sort of less global, more regional. And I think the other one is the borders. In the 90s, we had, we wanted to globalize, but we forgot about borders. And I think that was a mistake. It has never been about erasing borders. It has always been about thinking what the border needs, given the level of trade flows that we have right now.
Thank you, Ambassador. And Jerry, I'm going to turn another question, a question for you. You worked with Daniel in a white paper, right, about a trilateral entity called NADICI. And I'm interested in learning what strategies in terms of aligning workforce or other sectors could be learned from that, and how can that serve on the USMCA revision?
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. Again, I'm also thankful for the invitation and might up. One of the things that I've been working on for over 40 years is how do we make North America more efficient and complement each other. That includes infrastructure, that includes workforce development, that includes innovation and technology. So Daniel and I, combine and leverage our level of experience, his academic experience and my hands-on experience and working on ports. And I've worked on ports of entry, infrastructure, and the implementation of new ports during this 40-year career. I've been involved with the border. So I brought that experience, and we discussed the concept of creating a North American Industry Council, where you take these models of how do you make not only the workforce, that doesn't include just on the private sector side, but even on the public sector side. We have to have adequate talent in our ports of entry of our staffing so that we can facilitate the flow of commerce and trade. And how do we create a formal entity within the North American framework of the agreement and say, similar to the NADBank and the success of the NADBank, we have Ambassador Gutierrez, who was definitely very involved in that. But we kind of replicated that concept, but attach it to a North American industry where we can grow from that and have the model where you bring industry, private, with the public entities, so that it enforces the strength of the supply chain network of North America. Only then, until we have a structure, and the three governments agree to it, will we be able to achieve that connectivity and that ability to work together in making us a more efficient North American region. That's what we focus with the creation of the NADICI.
Thank you so much, Jerry. And speaking about workforce and training skills, Jorge, one question that I have for you, you work in the rail industry, right? So what are the challenges and what are the needs for this industry in terms of workforce training?
Well, one of the advantages of railroads is they naturally have very competitive compensation. So the retaining of the talent at the ranks level, it's not economical. It doesn't come from the side of wages. It comes from the side of what we are mostly looking for, and it was more astringent after the pandemic, which is quality of life. We're all looking for quality of life. When you're the crew of a train and you've conducted a 12-hour trip and take a quick rest, all you want to do is go back. So we're looking for more creative ways of giving that quality of life back to the people that work for us, for our colleagues or workers. And we're implementing, when we're talking about talent, we see technology as part of that talent because it's ingrained. So we're looking for AI technology and other kinds of technology that allows us to give that quality of life back to the workforce. And so those enablers are starting to work and pay off to get them to want to work for us, which is a challenge that other industries are seeing more and more. Naturally, in order to work for a transportation company, you work out of your safe place, which is your home, right? So we want to give them those elements to feel comfortable out there.
Thank you so much, Jorge. And by the way, I was very surprised about 30% only of the trade going by rail. But well, thinking about that connectivity that you mentioned, Ambassador Jerónimo, would it be feasible to have a binational customs agency? And what do you think about that? Well, what are the next steps?
I'm biased about that because we put a paper last year on that. I think it's a great idea, obviously. I think it's feasible. It's not going to be easy, but I think it's feasible. I think that the governments and the appropriate authorities should give it serious thought. Why? Essentially for two reasons. One is a big chunk of the problems we have in the bilateral relationship right now are directly related to customs. Fentanyl is a customs problem, mostly. It's not, you have the production, but it's essentially, the problem is how do you tackle the customs dynamic of fentanyl and other type of. And the other one is competitiveness. There's few areas in which both sort of the competitiveness agenda and the security agenda of Mexico, the United States, and obviously Canada also converge in customs. So, and that's one. And secondly is the problem is that, it's a coordination problem. The other reason is that even though there's a lot of improvement that have taken place in the way that the North American partners deal with shared custom challenges, it's still very difficult. There's still not enough systemic coordination of that. So what we have proposed is, once we get past the USMCA review, hopefully without too much blood and not reopening too much of the agreement, and we have a little bit of a better, panorama to look at the future, we can look into that. And what we think could be, if you go to Washington or here to some, even people within government, I'm not so sure about Canada, you tell them, let's do a customs agency, they say, you're crazy, right? And the point is there's some model that could be followed, which Daniel and I propose, which is the same as we use for managing water, the IBWC, because it has a treaty, so there's a very clear legal framework. You have two sections that report to each of their governments, and they are allowed significant leeway to coordinate on a daily basis, in short. So you can follow that model that has been successful and hopefully, address some of the problems that we have on customs.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. A question that I have for you, Daniel, is thinking about this Binational Customs Agency. What are the needs in the next 5 years in terms of data sharing and in terms of technology, AI, blockchain, IoT?
I mean, I think those are the three key technologies that are going to impact cross-border trade and hopefully make it more efficient, right? I mean, AI is going to give you all the predictive analysis that you need to be able to predict risks in close to real time, right? I mean, it's going to be able to analyze hundreds, thousands, whatever you want of documents and help you or help the customs agency predict risks ahead of time. A blockchain, or if you want to call them verifiable certificates or whatever, it's going to give you traceability and visibility from door to door, from provider to supplier to end customer, right? And all within, I mean, I wouldn't say an unhackable, but close to an unhackable ledger, right? And then you have IoT, which it's all the, IoT stands for the Internet of Things, all these smart sensors that you can equip, especially the new infrastructure that's coming online right now. Yesterday we were listening to the new logistics complexes and bridges that are coming online, and they have the ability to start out as what we call smart port of entries, right? And implement all this technology from the get-go. And who knows, we might reimagine the whole cross-border trade process, and not as in its traditional terms as we have it right now, but something that these technologies can really impact, right? And now another thing is, okay, the technologies are there, the technologies can have these impacts, but if there's not a cooperation between the three countries to be able to talk to each other, to communicate within systems, I've been writing for a while now about a digital wall that exists between the United States and Mexico, because custom systems, they don't have the mechanisms or the IT to be able to communicate, the communication protocols to be able to communicate. So that's a whole other ballgame, right? But the technologies are there. The key is to be able to have them communicate between the countries with them.
Thank you, Daniel. Jorge, a question for you with respect to data sharing and technology digitalization. Is that something that rail industry currently uses? And what do you foresee with the North America integration, digitalization playing a role in data sharing?
Well, it's like this. The railroads are not noticeable for developing technology. The last breakthrough we had was 200 years ago when we started, and then essentially going from steam engines to diesel electric. So we're at the forefront now of leapfrogging everything that we saw pass, and we're very actively pursuing AI as a means of doing things at the very brick and mortar activity of railroading, like building a train. A person takes quite a minute to just build it right. It's 4 million decisions. AI does it in seconds, right? So we're in our journey for AI as an industry, us as a railroad. So we're now letting AI build those trains. We're letting AI assign those engines. We're letting AI make decisions on how to pass trains, how to meet trains. But we're doing it in our own silos. We are doing it. Our US carriers are doing it. Canadian carriers are doing it. Just imagine if we had this common understanding of what we predicate on, which is a seamless service, and shared all that, then we would have a truly seamless service. And that's what we're aiming for.
Thank you. And Jerry, you work for the bank industry. You know a lot about investments. What do you see the role of private investments into the modernization of infrastructure along the U.S.-Mexico border ports of entry?
Well, now you're speaking my language. We talk about investment and you get a bank involved. That's music to my ears. First of all, I live in Laredo, Texas, and I thank God I live in Texas, and I live and work in Laredo, Texas every day. So I live North American trade every day. And these are trucks, trains, airplanes, pipelines. So, we love all of this because that's economic activity, economic vitality. But at my end, I think it's important that we all understand that times change faster. Our infrastructure is inadequate. Our processes need to be improved. Our efficiencies need to be elevated. And quite frankly, there's little dialogue. I don't like to talk anymore about, in our particular case in Texas, where we have 49, 50 ports of entry, about bridges, because we have Rio Bravo, Rio Grande. We have to start thinking of ourselves more as logistics platforms, intermodal logistics platforms. Get away from, I've got 2 bridges, I've got 7 bridges, or I've got 2 highways that connect. It's all connectivity, but adequate infrastructure planning on a binational basis is critical, and efficiencies of our ports of entry continue. The Deloitte study that came out a few years ago really focused on other examples throughout the world where the processing time of processing of goods would take no longer than 30 minutes. That should be a standard. And as a developer of these ports of entry, inviting private sector participation, where it's not subsidizing ports, but enabling and executing the ability to invest, to make us more efficient as a logistics platform, so you can facilitate that movement of goods. We don't have that right now. We have the beginning of that in Laredo with the Bridge 405 project. We have the beginning of that in Maverick County with Puerto Verde, similar to the CBX project that you have in California with San Diego and Tijuana. Take that model where you invite the private sector to invest, not just subsidize, invest and be a partner with communities. That map you showed of the ports, I wish you would have left that map up there with all the cities. The only big city there was Detroit, now maybe El Paso, Juarez. You might want to give that as a big city. But they're all small communities. So therefore, they need to work with private sector because there's not that capacity to finance some of these projects down there. That's where banks come in as well.
That's great to hear. Jerry, thank you so much for your contribution. Ambassador Gerardo, you worked for North American Development Bank for some years. I was wondering how that connects to this. How do you see the private sector investing into the modernization of ports of entry? Is that feasible?
It's certainly desirable and it's also feasible. I think that, I think there's plenty of liquidity ready to invest in infrastructure in the US-Mexico border. I see a lot of, institutional investors that are, and banks that are, that they have sufficient money to update the infrastructure in the border, essentially all types of infrastructure, but in particular ports of entry. And there's the NADBank, who has been involved in some of the projects of ports of entry. The challenge, I think, it's twofold. The money's there. I think there's three important things. One is the process by which the ports of entry are thought, designed, bid out, constructed, and operated needs to be updated, made as simple as possible on both sides, and be consistent and provide certainty to the investor. What do I mean by that? Sometimes obtaining, for example, a permit for a port of entry will take 8 years, and sometimes it has, in some cases, it has taken just a few weeks for different reasons. So that is very complicated. If you want to, the investor is going to want certainty. That's one. And I think that the governments, the authorities, the appropriate authorities, especially with respect to customs, need to do, highways need to do two things. One is be clear about what is the level of participation that they want from the private sector at the very outset. At least that is not always clear on the Mexican side. I think it's much clearer on the US side. And then we need to think about how are the highway systems going to evolve for the next 50 years in Mexico, the United States, and Canada, and do that on a regular basis. We have already some of the big trade corridors, supports to planes, but we're not doing enough. And where do we eventually are going to need to build or modernize some of that infrastructure? I completely agree with Jerry under the notion of logistics. The port of entry of the 21st century needs to be completely rethought. And we don't do that. Let me conclude with one brief comment about logistics in general and about what we're talking about. This is especially important for Mexico. Mexico's capacity to leverage whatever is left of the nearshoring phenomenon, which I don't think there's much, but anyway, and to leverage its geographical position it's going to depend very much on us having the appropriate infrastructure, and in particularly logistics infrastructure. Every country has an infrastructure gap. The case of Mexico, it's around 2% of GDP each year, or $544 billion from now till 2040. Mexico, according to the Logistic Performance Index of the World Bank, we're, I think, in the 66th place. Canada in the 7th, the United States on 17. We have a huge gap there, and part has to do because the customs systems do not communicate enough. So that is extremely important. The money is there, in conclusion, but it's always harder. It's not the money and the economics of the projects; those are either usually there. Is everything that surrounds projects as complex as a port of entry. That makes it,
I have a question for you, not now, but it's related to economic security. Okay. And in terms of how we can line processes across ports of entry, Pancho, how can the local government, port authorities, and border communities align the strategies with respect to private investment and workforce training and anything else you'd like to add there?
It starts with persistence. Number one is the community and their leaders, starting at the local level in industry. Industry, in my time in the legislature, and it's good to see Jerry, because we were laughing because the last time I saw Jerry, he was testifying in front of one of my committees, and he's the epitome of persistence. And so industry, along with the local entities, need to practice persistence. And I think that you look at, for instance, an issue like workforce, the persistence and looking at your bread and butter issues in terms of educating your workforce. You know, somebody mentioned demographics earlier. We need to recognize that, you know, baby boomers are aging out of the workforce for the most part. Generation X is next. How are you going to train the next generation of workers? You know, one of the points of leverage in this new for negotiating the agreements going forward is the age of the population. Well, how are you going to do that? And the government needs to be flexible and respond to those things. And so for the border community, and I'll speak from the experience that I have living, you know, along the border in Eagle Pass and Piedras Negras, is that, and right now, you know, Jerry mentioned this exciting project with Puerto Verde, and it requires a lot of persistence on behalf of the industry itself, on behalf of the investors, and on behalf of the local leaders to make the government officials and to make the leaders known at the state level and the federal level, hey, this is something that's important. And the money's there to leverage. You know, with respect to the infrastructure, one of the biggest problems that I had when I reached state government was convincing my colleagues, who I believed were also a constituency. You know, for an elected official, there's three constituencies: the people that elected you, the special interest in industries, and your colleagues, their constituency. And part of that is convincing them that what's relevant for investment and infrastructure on the border is not just considering the U.S. side, which is very, in my opinion, myopic. You've got to consider the fact that, you know, in Eagle Pass, you have a population in the county of about 60,000. But you have about 500,000 people right on the other side of the river. And so those are the things that I think that government needs to mesh with the locals in order to maximize these things.
Thank you so much, Poncho. So efficiency is very important across borders. By the way, we have a report on how a 10-minute reduction in border wait times impact the trade across North America. But one question that I have for you, Jorge. So what are the top priorities to improve cross-border rail operations between Mexico and the United States right now?
All right. Here's when we're looking at logistics service, we look at three things, right? The processes that enable them, the talent that operates them, and the infrastructure where they are riding on. So I'm just going to use an example that we're currently undergoing. When you look at the rail bridge crossing between Mexico and the United States as Eagle Pass, there's one bridge, right? It's not an American bridge or a Mexican bridge, it's the rail bridge. Why is that? Because it costs a lot of money to build a second one, right? So we share that asset. Makes sense. Right now we're in the process, now I'm going to speak about talent. Right now we're in the process of maximizing the use of that bridge, and by virtue of looking at that, as it turns out, all authorities and all stakeholders in the community of authorities realize that what makes the most sense is have an international crew. That crew that runs the train from Piedras Negras all the way to the yards at Eagle Pass, brings another train. It increases the efficiency and usage of that bridge tremendously, by 50%. And it's a shared resource. In this particular case, it's Mexican talent going back and forth, right? Now, if we all agree that we can share assets like a bridge, talent operating on that infrastructure, why can't we agree on the rules, on the common rules that would allow us not to need, for instance, 2 gamma rays? Why do we need one on each side of the bridge? So common use of these limited resources, which is talent and infrastructure, by virtue of leveraging common sense processes that allow us to reach the mutual goals of the region, is how we make those borders more efficient.
How do you see a smart border operating? I want to get your insights on that smart border. How does that look like?
So how do I see a smart border, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we've developed in conjunction the Texas Center there at Texas A&M International University with the Texas A&M Transportation Institute, TTI. We developed a concept called Smart Port of Entries, right? Focused very, very much on land ports of entry. So that's what I was saying. That we've been working with several projects there. With Puerto Verde, we've been in talks with them. We've been in talks also with Bridge 45 at Laredo, because we feel that that's the way to go. Right now that they were talking about public-private partnerships, I think that's the future for these logistics developments. And I agree with Jerry about these logistics platforms. But we have to make sure that they're smart logistics platforms, right? So that's where these technologies that I was talking about, I call them logistics. It's a play on words there between logistics and technology. It's what we use to research how these exponential technologies are impacting cross-border trade and supply chain and so on. So again, you have a blank canvas with these new ports of entry. I mean, you can start and you can reimagine as much as we can the border crossing. Right now that Jorge was saying, well, you have the bridge, and well, are we still gonna have the bridge? Are we gonna have the technologies before they get to the border? Are we gonna, I mean, there's all these possibilities. The thing is that we need something to be able to have the three countries work on, right? I mean, I'll close with this. The United States, it's leading the charge on AI, right? It's battling China for supremacy on AI, and we're all hoping and working that the US can pull that off. But what we also have to work on is to make sure that the US doesn't win that battle and then turn around and Mexico and Canada are way back there, right? They have to tag along for this ride, and that's the only way we're gonna get more efficient, smart port of entries.
Thank you so much, Daniel. By the way, Ambassador, I am reading a question related to security. I'm going to pass it over to you. Take your time. Jorge, so how does a smart portal look like?
To us, it looks like this. If we pre-certification for the movement of passengers, like global entry, if we have pre-certification for companies that do business right, the North American way, like CTPAT, we need to take those models and expand them so that we move the border away from the physical line where it is right now and move it to the points of origin and destination. Most raw materials have a point-to-point travel journey. Most finished goods have a point-to-point travel. Most of the companies that operate and run this raw materials and finished products are either certified or certifiable, certainly. So bringing that along with some other governmental models, like the way we pay taxes, and then if you're not doing something right, then you come and get investigated, right? So if you have pre-certification for companies that do business right, and you still keep the right to investigate them and move the borders away from the border to the origins and destinations in all three countries, then you're effectively eliminating the hassle of going across the line.
Thank you, Jorge. Poncho?
I'm going to catapult off that. I represented the largest and most rural house district in the United States, and I understand something about cattle exportation. It's kind of, you know, I'm a gentleman farmer, so I understand that a little bit. And one of the things that strikes me about that, and struck me then and strikes me now, is that we have the models that exist regarding what Jorge is talking about at a very simple level. Our USDA inspectors would go into Mexico to inspect cattle for ticks at a very simple level, away from the border, so that the cattle wouldn't lose weight as it's crossing the border. So these things are not alien or foreign. The ability to do this exists at a very base level. Our governments intuitively understand that. Yet for some reason, and we have very intelligent people working on these issues, we seem to get stuck. And I think the ambassador's comment about being overly optimistic on how these things were going to work is very prescient, because we don't have to be perfect at it, but we've got to be good. And I think there's a lot to be desired in terms of what good looks like at a smart border. But I think it starts at a very basic level because we're able to do that.
Thank you so much, Poncho. Jerry?
Okay, let me throw out a big wrench out here. First of all, we can't have a smart border without listening to the smart people that live and work on the border. There are a lot of smart people that live and work on the border in the private sector. And there's a lot of people in the public sector as well. You know, we need legislators that listen to God, you know, to the private sector. God gave us two of these and one of these for a reason, right? Listen to what the users and the stakeholders value to become more efficient. Our public officials need to pay more attention to what we say. Sometimes it's a one-way conversation, the government telling us how to run our business. We know how to run our business, but we need to have that dialogue and that communication that we heard this morning over breakfast. So therefore, if we have that combination of listening to the smart people that work, we will have efficient ports of entry. We will have more, you know, better fluidity of commerce and goods. And at the same time, we will have the ability to expand and grow our ports of entry to become the most efficient ports to compete globally. North America has that ability to do it. If you listen to people on Nuevo Laredo, in Laredo, Texas, or in the Ambassador Bridge in Detroit, or in Windsor. That dialogue and that communication is key and tantamount to having the best and most efficient ports of entry to compete globally.
Thank you so much. And I think that's a great point. And we have a lot of people from the border communities. Please raise your hand. There you go, Sophia. There you go. So one of the things that I invite you to do is to speak up on behalf of the border communities, to be the voice of the border communities. And
First, let me, if I have to leave you with one thing is the US-Mexico border has been run the last 50 years by emergencies. That's how we handle the border. There's an emergency on fentanyl, there's an emergency of water, there's an emergency of whatever thing. So one is you do have to have the determination to have some basic planning, joint bilateral about, how the border looks like now, 5, 10, that's one. You asked about data, Mayra. In my experience, I don't see any reason, I cannot think right now of any data points or any data produced by customs of both sides that both governments would not have an interest in sharing, I would say even make public, unless somebody's playing games. Now, my experience dealing sometimes with people on security matters is that you ask them about that, you say, what about this, that? Well, that's very delicate. And the truth is they don't know. That's my experience. They usually use it on excuse. I think most of the data that I can think, and I may be wrong, but most of the data that is trade related on the border, it's, they shouldn't have an issue with sharing. I mean, that's my own view, right? But those two things, I think you asked about what does a smart border look like.
Yeah.
So, I think data sharing. I think pre-clearance, I think most of you, we have to pre-clear as much as possible. I think we have to design the ports of entry as much as possible together. We're doing that in some, to some level, and it has evolved. But it's, we still have, there's basically two ways in which you deal with a port. Yeah? One side does its thing, the other does it, and then we coordinate on the corridors. Or we decide this is what the port is going to look like for all of the binational operations, and we design the port together. We haven't, I think, there have been attempts to do that. The last one is Otay, and we didn't quite get there. I think we probably won't get there. And I think that's relevant. I think the design of the ports of entry needs to be much more coordinated. And finally, I would love to have, this agency that we've talked about be eventually at some point in time that handles the customs issues of, I think that would be helpful.
thank you so much, Ambassador. I'm going to just share the poll responses. We got 32 responses, 34 now. And the number one priority that's been mentioned, well, we have now 2. Modernizing border processes through technology and automation is one priority. And the second one, investing in modern border infrastructure, ports of entry, transportation, corridors, and logistics hubs. I want to say that in my eyes, North America is a region. And we still have to do a lot of work to make it more competitive, but we have to make our case as why working together is more beneficial. Thank you so much for your time, and see you soon.
Thank you.